Back with us is David Birdsell, our political analyst and also the Dean of the Marxe School of Public and International Affairs at Baruch College. Thank you for being here.
Great to be here.
That was about, what, an hour, almost an hour and a half?
Just about. He went a long distance, but an incredibly dense, packed speech. There's a lot here. A lot.
Let's talk some of the first issues, just on the social issues, which really got some of the biggest applause.
Well, he began with a long list of things that he wants to do to make New York friendlier to women, friendlier to ex-felons, less likely to disadvantage people who are arrested on drug crimes, legalizing marijuana. And then later in the speech, he talked about exactly what he wanted to do, for example, on a women's agenda, to pass a state-level enshrinement of Roe v. Wade protection so it can't be taken away, at least under most circumstances, by the federal government. He wants to eliminate things like revenge porn. He wants to make it easier to prosecute various kinds of sex crimes and to report them and to keep the reporting periods long standing. He wants to create access to contraceptive drugs and to sexual health overall. I mean, a terrific agenda, particularly for people who have been plumping for exactly these kinds of solutions from the left wing of the Democratic Party, now here in a State of the State and budget address from Governor Cuomo.
So $175 billion budget, and as he went through each of the top priorities, one he spent a lot of time on, of course, was transit and the MTA, which has been very, very topical, and he's been part of it as he has started his third term over the past few days. Let's talk about that and congestion pricing.
Well, this was an interesting act of political jiu-jitsu on the part of the governor. So he's been criticized for not doing more to invest in the MTA. And starting with his budget director's statements over the weekend, but really culminating this speech, his line is essentially, well, I didn't have the power to do it. I only have 6 seats on the board. It's a 17-member board. I can't make that happen. But if you give me the power, I'm going to change the way that the subways function. And so he's embracing responsibility, but looking forward rather than quarreling about the past. And to fund it, he's putting in place congestion pricing, assuming that this passes. That will be one of the more politically controversial aspects of this speech, and then committing the state to provide 50% of whatever isn't paid for, with the city, of course, on the hook for the other 50%.
Yes, he said, the congestion pricing, which would be a toll to all vehicles that enter the central business district of Manhattan below 60th Street.
That's right.
Everybody pays the same, and he would propose that then, therefore, there would be no toll on the FDR Drive, and that would raise a bunch of money. I wrote it down
15 billion.
15 billion, but
That's
as
right.
you said, still there's more capital funds would be needed, and he said 50-50 city and state.
That's right. Now, there was no upward bound that he placed on that. He does have an upward bound for capital spending overall in the state, but that's tariffed right now at 150 billion, pardon me, for infrastructure development overall. There are a lot of projects that right now are seeking that funding. He began the speech after that quick hit on a list of 18 largely social justice-related issues. He then went to look at all the capital projects that have been completed within the last year, and there are a lot.
Right, when you think about it, the airports,
state parks, waterway improvements, a whole host of things all over the state.
And things that are in progress, like the Moynihan Station, things that are still to come.
Right, and he talked about JFK going all the way out through 2025.
More on the board, yep.
And what that does is to create a believability. I mean, a large part of the beginning of the speech was to say, see, we've been able to do it, and then show the pictures of the things that they've been able to do. He even showed the Tappan Zee Bridge being dynamited earlier in the day today.
I think that was the very first thing that he wanted to start his speech with a bang.
With a bang.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest bang you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
And so it really lends a sense of credibility. These are credible ideas moving forward, and that's really embedded in the structure of the whole speech. These are achievable goals, but a very, very ambitious agenda.
Let's talk about education. He said one of the largest cost priorities of the budget, an increase of 3.6%, $27.7 billion. And I just sitting here, we watched the whole thing along with you, and a couple of things that you went wow on was when he talked about the disparity of the money going to poorest districts. And that was an assumption that wasn't really helping the kids who need the help.
Well, that's right, and I went wow at that point, because this was another bit of really adept political jiu-jitsu on the governor's part. So he has been attacked by the left wing of his own party for not investing enough in failing schools, and particularly lower income schools. Today he changes the narrative because he wants to keep education spending down a little bit so that he can spend a little bit more on health care as the federal government retreats from health care. And what he did was say the problem is not that we're not spending the money, we're spending it on the districts, and then the districts turn around and spend it disproportionately on wealthier schools. So he's going to ask for school level accountability throughout the state, and to flip that calculus, spending more money on less well-to-do schools individually, not districts. And that could be a game changer, but it really skirts the kind of head-on attack that we have to spend more money. He says we're spending enough money with another 3.7% increase, but what we have to do is change the allocation.
Change how it's done. The $1.8 billion for the middle class tax cut. That's a challenge, but that would really make a difference in so many people's lives. It
would make a big difference, and as we're looking at the revaluation of properties, the much larger tax bills on the property tax side, even with the caps at 2%, if you change that valuation, that tax bill could go up much more than 2%. So this is a real give back. He's moving down rates by more than a percentage point, particularly in the middle class, a little bit less than that, 0.85%, at the upper reaches of the income brackets, all the way to $300,000. That'll make a big difference for lots of New Yorkers.
Did we talk about the cannabis yet, the legalizing of recreational marijuana?
Not very much. We talked about the social justice implications. You know, he's talking about obviously removing criminal penalties from something that has put a lot of people in jail. He's talked about sealing criminal records so that if you've been indicted in the past, convicted of a marijuana offense, that will go away from your records and that it won't hang over your head for job applications and other kinds of things. But he's also making clear that this will be a $300 million tax revenue play that cities and counties across the state are free to say no to if they don't want to go down that road. So this is a very generous speech in many ways, and of course a speech that closes in those ringing notes of identity and immigrant identity strongly embraced. I would go so far as to say this is not only the most ambitious speech that Andrew Cuomo has given in his time as governor, but also probably one of the best ones, and one that you have to ask, as much focused as this is on New York State, will he
run for president in 2020?
And that last ringing call to who we are as New Yorkers, and by extension Americans, it's hard to see it in other terms.
Do you feel that just in the presentation-wise also, I mean, the graphics, this is at the Egg, this beautiful auditorium in Albany, the production of it, too. I mean, nothing that should not be lost on how it was planned, how it was presented to the legislators.
It was very carefully presented. He did not do what he has sometimes done, which is to have people in the audience who can stand up and be examples of this or that, people who work in particular professions, who live in particular areas of the state. This was all focused on the governor, all focused on what was going on stage, until the very end, when he begins calling out members who weren't standing and applauding the immigrant language and saying, what you're not an immigrant? And it gives a sense of the kind of momentum he believes that he's building, and the kind of names that he's going to check as he tries to move toward these policies that he said he's always wanted to do but couldn't do because he didn't have Democrats in the majority in the Senate.
Yes, 63 in the state Senate, 150 total members, 150 total members in the state assembly. What about his comments about the federal government? They were just trickled in at the beginning and then pow at the end on, how those problems, the issues from Washington, have affected New York.
That's right. He even said that the federal government is attacking New York. He didn't mention the president by name,
nope.
But he talked about federal policy, and he talked about ramifications in things like health care, in things like the elimination, or at least the radical curtailment, of the state and local tax deductions that many New Yorkers had relied on when filing their federal forms. So it was policy-based. It wasn't just sort of attitudinally based, and that really gives a sense of how he understands his leadership in distinction to leadership in Washington. And again, that's one of the reasons why so many people are abuzz about his ambitions into this primary season.
My last question, Professor Birdsell, is about what type of criticism can we expect to hear from Senate Minority Leader Flanagan and others who just are going to go TikTok over things here? They go, nope, 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 Cuomo, nope, nope, nope.
Well, I think we're going to hear a lot of pushback on some of the ballot access questions. There was a lot in here about same-day voting, about restricting lobbyist activities, et cetera. Those have always been things that the Republican majority has, in fact, stopped. So we're going to hear about voting fraud. We're going to hear about the integrity of the election system. I think the Democrats probably have the votes and the popular momentum to get that passed. There will be a lot of concern about the size of this budget, now at $175 billion. It's a lot of money, even a big state like New York. And some people are going to want to pare back spending, and they're looking at, potentially large liabilities like this new gubernatorial assumption of primary responsibility for the MTA. What does that mean down the road? So those things are sure to come to the fore. And then, of course, there will be a number of people who object on moral grounds to legalizing marijuana. But I think this is, by and large, a politically doable agenda from the governor today.
Interesting. It's so helpful to have you here. Thank you so much, Professor David Birdsell.
Thank you.
Baruch College. I felt like I'm a little bit in class, and I like it.
It's good to be here.
I learned a lot. Really appreciate your perspective. Thank you for being here.